Good morning and welcome to lesson 13, the last one in this whole unit on Old Testament heroes, I guess you could call it. People who proved faithful. And today's lesson is on Esther, um, God's chosen people, God's chosen queen, excuse me. Esther 7 3 through 7. Main idea of the lesson today is God may put you in a special place for a special time and for a special purpose. And I'll give you some history here in a minute, but that's kind of where she was at, what happened. She was faithful. The study aim is to understand that we can trust God even when he seems to be absent. And so, this is during the time of the exile. Um, we know towards the end of the Old Testament, God's people, um, God sent the prophets, man, and prophet after prophet said, you need to, you know, repent. You need to follow the teachings of Moses. You need to fly right. And they just would not do it. And so God pulled back his protection from them to kind of get their attention, and it did. And Babylon, one of the superpowers in the north, came down, destroyed the city of Jerusalem, destroyed the temple in 586 BC, and carted all the people off into exile. That's what we call it. And in Babylon, they only left the old and the poorest, weakest people of the land in Israel, and everybody else got taken to Babylon as slaves. Well, Babylon was defeated by the Persians. And so 586 BC, Jerusalem is destroyed by Babylon. In 539 BC, Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon. And there's this thing going on in the north of Israel. Israel's already always had powerful neighbors. They do today. And so there's always some dominant power in the north. Egypt was always powerful, okay? They're kind of in the south, and Israel is sandwiched in between. So before this, it's Assyria, and then it's Babylon. So in 539, Cyrus the Great, who is a Persian, conquered Babylon. So you had Cyrus the Great, you had Cambyses, you had Darius, and then Xerxes. And Xerxes is the ruler during the time of Esther. After that, Alexander the Great conquers and destroys the Persian Empire in 334 BC. And then you have the Romans. Okay. So there's a backstory in how Esther becomes queen. She's a slave, she's beautiful. And, Xerxes' first wife was stubborn, I guess, and he called for her, and she said, "I'm not coming," and so she got demoted. And it's like the men got together and said, "We can't have this," and so his people around him said, "You've got to do something." So he demoted her, and so they immediately started looking for a queen. So she's a slave. Esther is. They didn't know she was Jewish, and but they they bring her, in, and he likes her, and he selects her to be his queen. And so there you go. Obviously, she was beautiful. It says it in the Bible. I think it's interesting that the Old Testament said she had a great figure. And so that's where we get that whole terminology. It's from the book of Esther. We still use that terminology today. But here she is, and she's queen. But man, to be queen, she had very little rights. I mean, it wasn't like she could just walk in and visit with the king. She had to be summoned. She's still like a slave, really. And but in the meantime, um, her and her uncle Mordecai start sensing that Haman, who is evil, who is one of the advisors to Xerxes, wants to destroy the whole Jewish race. Doesn't that sound familiar? And he's about this close to being able to do it. And Mordecai goes to Esther and says, "You've got to go to the king. You've got to go to Xerxes and try to intervene in this circumstance." And I mean, she's like nobody. Yes, she's queen, but she has no rights, really. And she does. And we'll read the story. So let's read first part of this where she goes to Xerxes. You know what's interesting? I want to encourage you, go read the book of Esther. I mean, it doesn't take that long. I did it yesterday. And these were very wicked people. I mean, if you crossed Xerxes, he would impale you on a pole. I knew that the Assyrians did that, but the Persians, these all kind of basically the same peoples. They're Eastern culture. But I mean, several times it talks about being impaled on a pole for crossing Xerxes. Um, I mean, pretty wicked folk here, very rough around the edges, I would say. But you just read it, and it's like we dress the story up, but she is a woman with no rights as queen. And I mean, she has to have permission just to go into the court to see the king, and she's the queen. Um, are you picking up on what I'm saying? It's just like we can spiritualize these stories and miss some of the most important details of it when that is a detail. So let's kind of look at the passage. The first one is Esther uses her position as queen to advocate for her people. And that's kind of the theme of the lesson is um, grow where you're planted. Terrible circumstances for her, terrible circumstances for the nation of Israel, but it is what it is. Accept your reality and make the best of it. And God can use that. And He did. He did. Well, here we go. Esther 7, 3 and 4. Then Queen Esther answered, "If I found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king," which is kind of weird, really. But what she's saying is that Haman doesn't just want to make us slaves. We're already slaves. He wants to annihilate the whole Jewish nation. He wants to exterminate it. And just because he can. And he has hate in his heart. And he's evil. Okay? And he's got a spurious blanket towards the Jews, which seems to happen a lot. So she actually uses her position as queen to stand up for her people. Okay? Well, it's just shocking to me to be the queen and not be able to state your opinion. But that's this is a patriarchal society, which we know even the Jews were there. To not have basic human freedom, even in a marriage relationship, for us, to me, is so weird. Well, Xerxes, what does he do? Undoubtedly, he had real affection for her. Now, was it based on her looks? Probably. We don't know. But he did like her, probably even loved her, and she did have sway with him. So, She had influence with him. God bless her for that. Let's read the second half of the passage in the book. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he, the man that is daring to do such a thing?" He was like outraged about someone in his court that would want to destroy a whole race and do it without the king's permission. Esther said, "An adversary and an enemy." Boy, she's straightforward, isn't she? "This vile Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. So he's like in the inner circle. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the garden palace. So he's like enraged over this. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. He knows his days are numbered. And you read the book and you'll see he meets his maker soon enough after this. But basically, after this, Xerxes allows all Jews anywhere in his kingdom under his power to defend themselves. And before, they did not have that freedom to do that. They're slaves in Babylon, in Persia, and had been there a long time with no basic human rights. And he gives them the permission to defend themselves when they're attacked, and they do, and they win, and the nation survives. Uh, Reading about this whole episode, the Jews still celebrate Esther and this great work that she performed. They call it Purim, Purim, and it's still celebrated in Jewish culture today. It's like a festival, carnival type thing. They have food and it's a celebration, really. And it seems like it's in May. And so the thing is, they still recognize her for what she did. Okay, and that's a beautiful thing. Um, Truths. What can we learn from this? As when you think the Lord isn't doing anything, He's usually doing everything. Um, haven't you felt that? Um, I have. You pray and you work, and you're like, "Okay, Lord, need a little help down here," and you feel like nothing's happening, but God is. And part of the truth of the lesson is that God in His sovereignty placed Esther in a place of influence and a time where it was particularly needed. Okay. The lesson seems to teach that she's not there by accident. God was going to use her and had a plan and purpose for her life. And in the midst of very difficult trials and difficult circumstances, He had planted her there to do what she did. Now, she still had a choice, but she was obedient. You know, Mordecai came to her and says, "Okay, you've got to do something." And he believed that the Lord was responsible for placing her uh, in the household of Xerxes, and you know helped her become queen to influence. So, um, if you're sitting out there today and you're praying about something and nothing's happening, don't give up, because God could be doing everything and you just can't see it yet. So have faith. Second truth is bloom where you're planted. The Lord can use you right where you are. We've all been in difficult circumstances before, and are places where you would love to do something different. And there may become a time and place where you do something different. God may open up a door for you to go through. But until then, be faithful where you're at and bloom where you're planted. Um, I've lived long enough now to see times in my life where I thought they weren't particularly good, but looking back, they were great times and great days. Okay. So make sure you focus on the good things of today and not the bad, okay? And there are good things out there. Last thing is the Lord can use anyone He wants to make change, even a woman slave of a conquered country in Persia. Uh, you know, my wife and I were talking about this story this morning. I was telling her I was going to teach this lesson this morning, and we were talking about how God used a woman, not a man. He used a woman who was a slave of a conquered country in a powerful place to steer a nation. He can use anybody that He wants. He can use you. So be open. Pray with me. Jesus, we love you. We love each other. And I thank you for this story of Esther, who used what she had. She used her beauty. She used her place to influence a king who was difficult at best to protect her own people. And so I pray that wherever we're at today, we would be open to being used of the Lord for great things. We trust you. We love you. In your name I pray. Amen. You have a great week. Next week, we're going to start a study on heaven and angels. Should be a very interesting study. Take care.